That's right, I'm back to talk about Superman again. My first video about James Gunn's DC reboot covered how people's complicated feelings about Henry Cavill's portrayal of the hero influenced their feelings about this iteration, for better or worse, and I took the chance to briefly complain a bit about this movie's plot. However, I regrettably didn't really address the film's attempt to say something, morally and thematically, so that's what I'm here to do, along with pitching the plot I once thought this movie was going to have. But before I get into it, you should know that I'm just thinking out loud here, so if you like my brain vomit, you know where the like and subscribe buttons are. Now, without further ado, let's look at what I consider the real reason this film fails to resonate. This Superman film is unique in that it attempts to address interesting moral and vaguely political topics, like the ethics of interfering in geopolitics, and it asks what it would be like to be a hero to a world that rejects you out of fear. Oh wait, that's already been done before? How was it handled last time? Oh. Oh. Well, it seems Batman v Superman never really answered the questions it posed. It just had Superman brood over them until the third act, where he got his ass kicked by Batman and then died fighting Doomsday. So, I'd say there's some room for improvement there. Might James Gunn's Superman actually address these issues in some meaningful ways? Well, let's look at each issue separately. The interference in geopolitics, and Superman serving a population that fears him. First, the off-screen inciting incident is Superman stopping a war by threatening the offending nation's leader, understandably sparking controversy. The fact that the movie's longest and most compelling scene without action is a heated discussion about this act, and the fact that about half the plot continues to focus on this international conflict, seem to set it up as a major issue he'll have to address in the climax. However, when the third act comes and the foreign invasion he previously stalled resumes, Superman leaves the handling of the situation to the Justice Gang, who end it way more brutally than he would have, by the way. So if he was getting heat at the beginning of the movie, they should be in a ton of trouble by the end of it. But regardless, the movie seems to kind of take a stance, but it doesn't make the hero himself do anything particularly controversial in the end. Obviously, Superman wouldn't have murdered a foreign leader, but is the movie saying that was the right thing to do without actually making Superman himself do anything so controversial? I don't know, because James Gunn seems afraid to really address the issue, and instead let Superman have fun punching a bunch of Luthor's goons while his friends deal with the tough stuff. Second, kicking off the second act, Lex reveals what we are told is totally authentic proof that Superman was sent to Earth to conquer it, turning people against him. Without complaining about how insanely fast this all plays out, it creates an interesting conflict. How is it resolved? Well, in an equally insanely fast manner, proof gets out that Lex is a bad guy and the whole world turns against him. But as far as everyone knows, the incriminating evidence against Superman is still valid, so he still has to prove his own innocence. Oh wait, what is that? Lex being bad must somehow mean Superman is good, so the whole world instantly forgives Superman without question and apologizes for ever doubting him? Well, isn't that convenient? So, let's summarize. Of the two moral quandaries with which the hero is faced, one is addressed very untactfully by the team of side characters, and one just kinda solves itself thanks to the efforts of another group of side characters. And Superman gets to punch things. Wait, does he actually do anything in this movie to stand up for his moral principles or inspire people? I mean, I guess he gives a little speech to Lex Luthor and his team about what it means to be human before Krypto barges in. Is that really all it takes to provide thematic catharsis? Would BVS be far more inspiring if Superman had simply made a brief speech to Lex Luthor before dying? Is that all Henry Cavill's portrayal was missing? Look, in all seriousness, I did love David Cornsweet in the role, but his charm and personality was carrying this movie, because the plot didn't give him anything to do but punch things while his friends solved his problems, at least those not self-corrected by plot convenience. The biggest reason I was disappointed with this film wasn't really its incoherent and unfocused plot, its underdeveloped side characters, or its inability to slow down and take itself seriously. Ultimately, I didn't need this movie to be perfect, I just needed it to be inspiring. And while it offers a vague sense of optimism, and tells you that doing good is cool, it ultimately feels cowardly, because it never really addresses the questions it raises, or forces the hero to overcome his biggest non-physical challenges. It creates these compelling scenarios, but doesn't know how to resolve them, and just kind of hand waves them away while distracting you with explosive eye candy. That's the main reason this film feels so light. It isn't the quantity of jokes or the breakneck pace, though those factors don't help. It's the lack of any real substance in the story. It tries to create an appearance of depth and complexity, but it never actually leaves you with anything to ponder in the days after you watch it, which makes it either incredibly forgettable or incredibly infuriating if you're like me and all you're left to think about is the mountain of plot holes. But like I mentioned, I expected far more from this movie. Admittedly, the more trailers came out, the more this looked like an overstuffed feast of visual spectacle, and the more I feared for its plot. But leading up to the first teaser, James Gunn was saying some things that really got me interested. And when the teaser came out, it got me hyped. In fact, after listening to a number of bigger comic book nerds than me forming their own theories, I began to see a vision for how this film might be the most morally compelling Superman film to date. First of all, the comic story Kingdom Come appeared to be a major influence, thanks to the logo. This story is about an older Superman coming out of retirement in an age when superheroes aren't particularly heroic anymore, to set the example for the younger generation of metahumans. Additionally, James Gunn once referred to the old film Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which is about a young idealistic politician going to Washington, D.C. for the first time and struggling against the overwhelming corruption in Congress. These apparent influences gave me the impression this story would be, while not necessarily an origin story, certainly focused on a much less established Superman than the one we see in the actual movie, coming to Metropolis, finding the established modern superheroes to be somewhat corrupt, and trying to inspire them with his old-fashioned ideals. The revelation of what we now call the Justice Gang, as Maxwell Lord's corporate team, seemed to provide an interesting way for this story to play out, in which superheroes might be regulated and controlled, perhaps even created, by corporations and or governments, much like in the world of The Boys. I imagine Superman appearing in this world where metahuman activity was likely tightly regulated by law, with heroes having to be sponsored by corporate entities or work for government agencies in order to operate, and even then under strict laws. Of course, Superman basically gives the metaphorical finger to these laws in his efforts to simply do good, however, whenever, and wherever he can. The additional fact that he keeps his identity a tight secret certainly doesn't help people trust him, and the Baravian incident is likely the tipping point. I figured Lord Tech's Justice Gang would try to recruit him and butt heads with him when he refuses, while the government turns to Lex Luthor's Planet Watch to bring Superman under control. All this was compelling enough already, but the knowledge of Metamorpho's part in the story, and later that of his infant son, along with the appearance of the Stag Industries logo in trailer shots, opened up an additional possibility. In the comics, Stag Industries is a corrupt corporation much like LexCorp, and it was this company that created Metamorpho, and they didn't exactly treat him well. Thus, I predicted that somehow Superman would learn of Metamorpho, who is trying to escape Stag Industries, but is trapped because they have his infant son and are using him as leverage, as well as a test subject. Metamorpho seeks Superman's help, who realizes just how corrupt the superhero industry really is. He tries to help Metamorpho rescue his son and expose this whole story, and this is the big event that really kicks off the action of the plot, as Luthor uses this chance to try and apprehend Superman. In fact, the whole situation may have been a ploy by Lex to trap him, threatening Metamorpho's son and having him reach out to Superman for help, only to have him lure him into a trap. From there, various plot beats would play out, like Luthor breaking into the fortress, and perhaps learning and revealing to the world that Superman is, in fact, an alien. And the Justice Gang probably comes around and decides to help Superman, defying the law themselves in the process, and setting up the formation of the Justice League. The movie would end with the public's trust shattered in the corporations running the superhero industry, and Superman leading a new movement of unaffiliated heroes fighting for truth and justice rather than living like celebrities. So, wouldn't this have been a far more compelling story than the hollow, disjointed mess we were given? Elements of what I just laid out were alluded to in the movie, but they're never explored and rarely particularly relevant to the story. I mean, the fact that the Justice Gang is a corporate-sponsored team is only mentioned once, and it has no impact on, well, anything. And though Metamorpho was in the film in a somewhat similar role to the one I described, he ultimately just feels like he's there as a plot device. So, do you think what I was hoping for was better than what we got? I think so, but I want to know what you think. Let me know in the comments, and I look forward to discussing it with you. Until next time, never stay silent.